Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Throne of Steel episode number 173 based on novel. So let's start. Although Chen Yinga and Wang Yuanyuan possessed a domain of their own, they had actually only reached the first rank of the 9th step of cultivation. Their own domain was comprehended in the process of over 4 years of deep meditation, brought about miraculously. But beyond that miracle, the shortage in their cultivation was still a clear thing. Otherwise, Chen Yinga may not necessarily have lost to Li Jingxi, or at least have inconvenienced him to an even greater degree. As the temple's great gathering did not even permit any equipment, bright glimmer of hope's shortages became even more visible. That's why Wang Yuanyuan took a different approach from the beginning, by choosing to go for another type of battle. She was standing motionless, but actually maintained all her thoughts in the battle, looking for a hole in the opponent's strategy to bring her a victory in one blow. The powerful spatial domain started to compress Wang Yuanyuan's residing space, the spatial cracks growing more and more numerous. From outside the barrier, it appeared that over thousands of spatial gaps had appeared in the field, seemingly crushing anything in their contact instantly. So, what's to be done? What response will Wang Yuanyuan choose? A lot of spectators had these same questions arise in them. Finally, a first spatial crack made contact with Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain. With a swishing sound, like that of ice melted by a red-hot piece of iron, Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain bubbled up violently, and that spatial crack disappeared immediately. But by paying attention, one would notice that those spatial cracks were ripping away some of the blood energy released by the blood domain. This was just a beginning. Following that first one, even more of these headed towards Wang Yuanyuan. Swishing sounds kept resounding, one spatial crack after another disappearing swiftly after contact with the blood domain. But it was apparent that Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain was rippling violently, losing its might. The other party used a mix of magic and domain, while she only kept defending passively through her domain. The contrast was rather obvious. The two parties' domains kept clashing, during which a lot of spectators were already shaking their head. Even Li Jingxi had a smile appearing on his face, muttering aloud, "Is this girl looking for an opening? How could she even find one?" Old Yu's domain gave him the title Master of Constant Changes. There's no set rule at all. She wants to rely on her domain's explosive force to make a surprise attack, but her pains will only get deeper and deeper. With the thought of having one more powerhouse from the Mage Temple to make it through, Li Jingxi couldn't help but get into a better and better mood. Maybe his spiritual energy will really be replenished completely by the next round as well. However, because of his use of two great domain techniques, recovering to his peak by then would be really challenging. Time passed second by second, during which Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain was still very powerful even when faced against an attack combining spatial domain and magic, enduring tenaciously. At least several thousand cracks had already disappeared in front of the blood domain. Kier let out a light sigh. "I'm afraid that Yuanyuan won't be able to find an opening in the opponent's attack. This mage is very careful. Look, when attacking through his domain, he really launches extremely irregular attacks, varying between single ones and swarms. And the thickness of the cracks only keeps growing. Now if Yuanyuan goes on the offense, she's even more likely to get trapped. This old mage is just too cunning." Upon realizing what Yuanyuan's plan was, he immediately made a countermeasure. If this lasts, Yuanyuan won't hold out for much longer. Haochen patted Kier's hand, declaring, "Trust in her. Yuanyuan is not just stubborn but also clever. Her innate gifts may be the lowest, but she has still achieved extraordinary success. For her to have obtained her own domain before even reaching the second rank of the 9th step shows her intelligence and wits plentifully." Thinking of that, Long Haochen couldn't help but recall his previous teacher Azura Yi. He really had not met him for a very long time. Who knew where the Night Temple had sent him? Long Haochen had formerly asked his grandfather, but Long Qianying did not even breathe a single word of it, only telling him that Yi Hua was carrying out an extraordinarily important mission. So, Long Haochen had yet to find the opportunity to pay his respects to his teacher. In the field, Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain, which originally extended to 3 meters, was gradually compressed to a diameter of 1 meter, barely enough to protect her body. "Just concede, young girl. I don't want to injure you." The old mage's voice reverberated in all directions, his offense slowing down slowly. This being the temple's great gathering, the domain's compression was a really dangerous thing. In case something went wrong, Wang Yuanyuan's life may very well be endangered. But the instant the counterpart's domain slowed down, she finally made her move. Her speed was really immense. All the spectators only saw a flash of bloodlight, as she unexpectedly passed through the spatial gates instantly. The whole stage was immediately in a state of surprise. In fact, these spatial cracks were all spatial instabilities created through spatial magic, preventing any teleportation. Not only was the space extremely unstable, but furthermore could crumble at any time, all the spatial cracks being filled with an extremely strong swallowing force. Absorbing things was none other than one of its greatest powers. Throwing oneself inside is simply akin to suicide. But who could expect Wang Yuanyuan to make such a choice? This girl was just too staunch. Could it be that she would stake her own life rather than get defeated at the hands of the Mage Temple? After all, based on the temple's Great Gatherings rules, killing one's opponent would automatically get oneself eliminated. Even Li Xingxi had a look of complete shock upon catching sight of this scene. But the next instant, everyone here realized their own mistake. In a flash of bloodlight, Wang Yuanyuan already appeared in another spot. This very instant, the numerous surrounding spatial cracks started to get more and more chaotic. Because the whole field was filled of spatial cracks to the brim, when Wang Yuanyuan disappeared, only indistinct flashes of red could be seen in their midst. But something no one could see was occurring at that very moment. The spatial cracks started to disappear one after another, gradually revealing the situation in the center of the grounds. Then a breathtaking sight came. Wang Yuanyuan calmly stood there, her palm pressed onto the old mage's head. The latter did not utilize further magic, only looking at Wang Yuanyuan full of incomprehension. "How did you achieve that?" the old mage asked, full of incomprehension. "This was inside my domain, and with so many spatial cracks around. You cannot possibly have used any teleporting ability. I know that you have a spiritual stove enabling teleportation, and it is something for which I have already accounted. I don't understand how you could pass through the spatial cracks and end up right in front of me. My domain and magic are completely devoid of any regular pattern." Wang Yuanyuan calmly answered, "There is no ability devoid of the slightest flaw. It is because your spatial cracks were boosted thanks to your domain that so many of them had appeared simultaneously. It is indeed as you say, these spatial cracks are devoid of any regular patterns. But you have forgotten that they come from the same domain, and that is their common point. All of these cracks that were created from the same domain are all linked to each other, with spatial channels able to link them instantly like a spider web. What I did was all calculated. I picked a spatial channel that could connect me right in front of you, and that was all I needed." Wang Yuanyuan had said that as if it was very simple, but the old mage was greatly shocked. How could that be possible? That would require a massive amount of energy. Most of all, with just a little mistake, you would be torn in the midst of spatial ripples, or drifting in an endless space. No, this couldn't happen to me. Right, as you say, my spiritual stove cannot be used in your domain. But I can protect myself in a fixed spot by using my domain's defenses. This is also why I remain purposefully unmoving for so long, or else, by placing myself with my back facing the outside defensive barrier, I would have lasted for even longer. But I did not move in order to maintain my spiritual stove's positioning. That way, even if I ended up unable to pass through your spatial cracks, I would be able to trigger my connection with the spiritual stove, and return to the previous spot with the protection of my domain. Could it be that you didn't realize that when I was teleporting, the blood fog at the other side was maintained for some time? Why do you think it only disappeared when I arrived near you? It only lasted for 1 second, but that was enough for me to be decisive. So even if I had miscalculated, it would only have ended in failure, with no possibility of death." The old mage looked at Wang Yuanyuan, totally blank and remaining speechless for a long moment. Wang Yuanyuan retrieved her hand, and performed a warrior salute to him, turning back and walking out. "A moment." The old mage suddenly shouted to Wang Yuanyuan. Wang Yuanyuan turned her head to him. "Is there some other matter?" The old mage solemnly declared, "I have lost and am thoroughly convinced in my defeat. You may have won with your cleverness, but in this world, people capable of such intelligence and steadiness are far too few. You are bound to be respected in the future warrior temple." Saying that, the old mage solemnly bent to Wang Yuanyuan, before turning back with a smile on his face. When she came out from the stadium, the first thing that welcomed her back was Chen Yinger's warm hug. You've won. Yuanyuan, you're really awesome." Chen Yinger spiritedly hugged Wang Yuanyuan, who swayed visibly, shutting her eyes in her embrace, and muttering in a feeble voice, "Help me get moving." This fight's whole process looked really simple, but only Wang Yuanyuan and the old mage knew how pressuring the battle was to her. How about the process of the massive pressure brought upon her? Under such a pressure, she had to perform continuous calculations to get closer to her goal. Though her spiritual stove's position was fixed before she tore through the spatial crack, that was still in no way devoid of danger to her life. Since she wanted to beat the enemy and achieve victory whilst paying attention to her own safety, all these factors together meant her burdens were far too many. So far, out of 3 of the 6 battles, Bright Glimmer of Hope had already achieved 2 victories and occupied 2 seats in the top 6. The golden light of selection surged out and landed once again, shrouding Kier another time. This time, her opponent was from the spiritual temple. The 4th battle of the 5th individual round began. This summoner Kier had to face was a tall elder. All those who made it to the 5th round were powerhouses of the current age. The displays of strength of this summoner in the previous battles were seen clearly by everyone from Bright Glimmer of Hope. His strongest specialty was his contracted beast, a dragon, a genuine dragon. This summoner was the only dragon summoner out of the whole spiritual temple. When facing this dragon summoner, the pressure on Kier, as she was not allowed to use any sort of equipment, was really great. Although this summoner had yet to enter the domain-wielding realm, his summoned gigantic dragon was already a domain-wielding powerhouse. A shrill dragon cry came as a blue gigantic dragon appeared in the stadium. The dragon summoning elder was seated upright on its back. To vanquish him, one would first need to beat his summoned gigantic dragon. The dragon summoner grabbed the dragon's horn with a hand, shifting his sight toward Kier, his opponent. This blue gigantic dragon was of water attribute and reached a length of a full 50 meters. Even as it stood within the entire field, that was still a huge monster. Kier's body flashed, all traces of her disappearing inside the field. She knew that this battle would be an extremely difficult one. Without a way to use the sickle of the God of Death and Tower of Eternity, her strength would be excessively restricted. Beating this domain-wielding gigantic dragon would really be quite a challenge. It would be another story if she could use the 7 arts of the God of Death, but right now she could only beat the mount before the rider. The summoner's look became stagnant, connecting his thoughts with the water dragon. A dragon cry reverberated from the sky as an ice-blue ring spread out from the top of his head. Generally speaking, ring-type abilities would cover a limited range, but this ice dragon's ring seemed limitless, extending through the whole stadium's barrier and encompassing the whole audience as well. Kier's invisibility naturally left no traces under those circumstances. Her figure flashing, she appeared onto the field, but suddenly disappeared once again in mid-stride before the ring approached her, sweeping past it while leaving no traces. Spatial shuttling? This was a powerful ability that assassins would gain starting from a certain level of cultivation. The dragon summoner let out a faint smile. This was not his first time facing an assassin, and he naturally knew how to respond. The wings on the water dragon's back spread out, a terrifying blue water tide erupting from these wings. This was truly a perilous situation. A tidal surge of water essence attacked the whole stadium, reaching every corner in a flash. No matter where Kier would appear next, she would have to endure this water wave's attack. Furthermore, under the influence of such a massive water elemental attack, changes also started to affect the space. The closer one was to the core, the more intense these water waves would get. In the empty space, a crack quietly appeared in front of the water dragon, and Kier strode out. Pure halations dispersed from her body, as the purifying force condensed into a sickle of the God of Death which struck at the water dragon. It wasn't that she did not want to attack the dragon summoner, but in truth the water dragon's released water essence was far too massive. A blue barrier had long since enveloped his body, so if Kier chose to stubbornly attack him, the water dragon's greatest attack would surely follow in response. The water dragon's eyes lit up, opening its large mouth to spit a breath attack. In the meantime, the surrounding water essence suddenly turned into a massive whirlpool, pulling Kier's body toward its direction. A massive water pillar arose from beneath, attacking from 2 sides simultaneously. An ice-cold glimmer flashed in Kier's eyes and a white halo released from her body. That soft-looking white not only stopped the water dragon's spit, but purified all the nearing water essence as well. That was Kier's domain of purification. The water dragon let out a howl, its massive figure shivering slightly, clearly feeling a great apprehension in front of Kier's domain of purification, but it still launched its own domain in the meantime. An azure color encompassed the whole stadium, the water essence pulsing excitedly as if alive. Drop after drop, the water condensed into little dragons, swiftly emerging from the domain. Looking at them, they appeared extremely real, all charging at Kier. But everything surrounding their bodies suddenly turned illusory, as if forming a water blockade separating the dragon from Kier. This was a means used by the dragon summoner for self-defense, wielding a part of the domain's power defensively. After all, Kier was the only remaining assassin in the temple's great gathering, and possessed a domain of her own. What if the domain's force was suddenly sealed off? The dragon summoner's force was this gigantic dragon. All his abilities were related to this gigantic dragon, the two of them complementing each other. His spirit united with the water dragon, commanding the latter in battle. Not only did it boost the water dragon's technical aspects, but it also connected his spiritual energy with the latter's, the result approaching the 300,000. Facing the assault of the mini water dragons, Kier's eyes lit up. The light of purification was as if limitless, spreading through the light of purification swiftly. In the meantime, she raised her right hand, stretched forward. There seemed to be some stubbornness in her look, as well as great expectations. The dispersed petals started to shrink, gathering onto her palm. In this process, the surroundings of Kier's body were like a terrible whirlpool. The mini water dragons from that domain only managed to fly within a certain range of her body before smashing to pieces instantly, disappearing and turning back into water essence. However, the light of purification surrounding Caia did not spread further, leaving it unable to affect the water dragon's domain. The sight of those white petals gathering rapidly was pretty. Kier floated in midair, like an immortal. Her purification attribute had a very great characteristic, to remain unaffected by perturbation from other elements. This wouldn't change even if the other party were to utilize domain force. Even if it were even denser, water essence was in the end water essence. In circumstances where the light of purification had not launched any attacks, the water essence had no way to proceed beneath it. The water dragon's sight seemed slightly frenetic. It perceived an immense threat from Kier. Ra? Going past the light of purification would require a direct clash. Elemental essence was of no use, but skills could be used. All the mini-dragons in the domain roared, and immediately, everything in the water dragon domain lit up. The scope of the massive domain started to extend to the whole stadium, turning into a massive whirlpool. Every water dragon turned into a light flowing through the whirlpool, disappearing in the midst of this massive domain alongside the summoner and his water dragon. This wide whirlpool had a terrifying pulling force. Every circulating light charged toward Kier's domain of purification, producing a violent explosion, as well as some intense fluctuations in the white light on its surface. The spiral's rotation speed grew faster and faster, the impact force coming stronger and stronger. But this instant, that lotus flower in Kier's hand bloomed. Domain technique, flourishing lotus flower. On the last time when that lotus flower had made its appearance in the Tower of Eternity, it was not with its full power. But this time, Kier deployed it fully with no second thoughts. This was Kier's domain technique that she was not in full control of, as well as her strongest attack at her disposal without the sickle of the God of Death and Tower of Eternity. But would this domain technique be enough to defeat the water dragon? After flourishing lotus flower came out, a purifying force was released, then, it slowly arose above Kier's head. Immediately, Kier, who was originally sent flying upwards in the water dragon's whirlpool, returned to normal in a flash, and the flourishing lotus flower kept blooming above Kier's head. A ring of extreme white suddenly extended, causing every spectator in the stadium to immediately feel bewildered. Even the defensive barrier's protection seemed ineffectual. Gra! The water dragon's cry was filled with great panic, because it realized, to its horror, that this ring of white light from flourishing lotus flower only passed through its domain and kept expanding. Water essence was of no use in blocking it. Or perhaps no ability would be able to stop its advance. Even the dragon's extremely powerful soul's force seemed to be seeping out from its body. No mistake, this was the purifying force's most terrifying aspect. What was purified was not the body, but the soul. Kier's flourishing lotus flower stripped out soul force, and had extreme boosting effects. No matter how strong you are, if your soul is wounded, that is some irreparable damage. The water dragon did not dare attack Kier further, and contracted its massive domain, turning it into an immense sparkling barrier surrounding its body. In the meantime, its two dragon horns flashed in thunderous icy blue, protecting its own head. At the very moment, all its focus was put on defending its own soul, as well as that of the dragon summoner on its head. Once spiritual energy density reaches a certain level, there's not much to do anymore. The ice dragon perceived that Kier's domain of purification was actually not really suppressing its own water attribute, but its undead attribute. If it was an undead creature, even if it were twice as strong, those flourishing lotus flowers would have scattered it to ashes in a flash. But as its water attribute soul did not have much of the dark aspects, it was not purified too violently. Damage to one's soul is always a very dangerous thing. It had to defend against that at all cost. Flourishing lotus flower's white ring of light finally attacked the water dragon's barrier. The instant the two parties clashed, a bizarre chirping sound reverberated through the stadium. That very instant, all the onwatchers present felt their brains filled in a flash with the chirping sounds before blank scenes flashes through their minds, taking several seconds to recover. That feeling seemed to be seeping out from their soul. It felt like after swaying forth outside for a bit, it returned to their body. This kind of experience was in no way appreciated. These powerhouses from the 6 great temples that Kier had previously faced couldn't help but feel full of shock. How could they have thought that Kier actually had such means at her disposal? This domain technique was just too terrifying. For the defensive barrier to show such a strong reaction, how terrible would it be if that was a direct attack? The dragon summoner and water dragon reached their own conclusion. Inside the stadium a strange scene came to pass. The water dragon and dragon summoner both went stiff, as above their head a blurry figure appeared, shaped the same as them, only a lot smaller. Transparent, lifeless, stiff, and even full of shock. This was without a doubt their soul states after flourishing lotus flowers took effect. The water dragon's defensive barrier took effect to some extent, but it actually looked not too powerful. Their domain was being dispersed at an astonishing speed as well, along with the defensive barrier. However, after utilizing flourishing lotus flower, Kier also seemed out of strength. Her body swayed in the air, narrowly falling down, but a blue cane appeared in her hand, finally supporting her body. Although from the paleness of her face and her body's lack of spirit, one could see that she already didn't have much fighting strength left. However, she still had a firm look directed at the water dragon and dragon summoner in the air, as if waiting for something to happen. The expelled spirits slowly returned, having in the end not suffered a total purification by flourishing lotus flower. In the end, the water dragon and dragon summoner had joined their spirit force as one, adding that to the overall defensive effects of the domain, so although Kier's blow had great effects on their souls, it was unlikely to go as far as to disperse them. After a dozen seconds, the dragon summoner and water dragon souls came back to their senses, both out of breath. Even if the water dragon was very powerful, it was still instantaneously weakened to such an extent that it was unable to even maintain its spiritual wings. Falling from the sky and dropping to the ground, it caused a violent bang as the defenses surrounding his body and his domain shattered to pieces. Its soul was weakened such that it was totally unable to control these forces. So who won and who lost? The spectators in the Alliance's great stadium were basically all powerhouses from the 6 great temples. But this instant, almost no one could tell out the outcome of the match. Kier's domain technique benefited in its great unexpectedness, forcibly breaking the water dragon and dragon summoner's joint domain technique and damaging their very souls. But from the looks of it, Kier did not have any energy left either. Also, the water dragon and dragon summoner should take a bit faster to recover than her. Just as everyone was full of doubts, a white figure suddenly appeared behind the water dragon without any sound, and in a flash was atop the water dragon, a flash of sharp light aiming at the dragon summoner's throat. This timing was really ideal. The dragon summoner having just come back to his senses, and still under the shock from the water dragon's fall, this was a time of thorough distraction. Only when the sharp white glow had reached his throat did he finally react, but that was clearly too late. If that white figure wanted to kill him, he would already be dead. That white figure was clearly Kier, but an illusory Kier, whose sickle of the god of death was lightly pressed against the dragon summoner's throat, before slowly dissipating. Who could expect this? It was only when the victor was already determined that the dragon summoner had finally reacted. This image was visibly a remnant left from before Kier had utilized her domain technique. In other words, she had kept stealthily a doppelganger under the state of invisibility. But which other assassin could maintain an invisible doppelganger? No matter what the dragon summoner was thinking, this match was ultimately his loss. He may not necessarily lose out in strength against the equipment-less Kier, but her victory lay in her bizarre flourishing lotus flower and great planning. She knew very clearly that her flourishing lotus flower came with a massive consumption, stopping her from even continuing to battle. Her doppelganger's preparation was for this very moment. In ordinary circumstances, her doppelganger would by no means be able to injure the opponent, but, because of the shock from the lotus flower's attack, the water dragon's domain was shattered, and thus the dragon summoner was at his weakest state. It was only in search of the best opportunity that Kier had been looking concentratedly at the dragon summoner so far. One could only admit that Kier's strength was really a great deal. Being the saint daughter of Samsara, a god's chosen one, she had powerful abilities beyond the reach of ordinary assassins. For instance, maintaining her doppelganger after using invisibility, and with such great concealment. Even the water dragon's domain did not probe its existence, thus making the summoner's defeat no injustice. Her blue cane tapping on the ground, Kier slowly walked out. The match had already been concluded, and of course, as one of the 6 Great Temple's powerhouses, the Dragon Summoner naturally could not act shamelessly, especially with Chen Zidian watching. At this point of the competition, Bright Glimmer of Hope had ended as great victors of the individual competition. For spots out of the 6 matches actually belonged to them. Long Haochen stood at the great stadium's entrance, calmly waiting for Kier's return. Looking at her blue cane tapping on the ground, Long Haochen's eyes were full of warmth, visibly recalling the scene of himself sending off Kier every day back then. Kier joined Long Haochen's side, a smile on her face. Her hand pulled by Haochen's, she was supported back to their seats. This time, the light of selection kept going on as Long Haochen unconsciously raised his head. Only the last 2 matches were left for this round, and Bright Glimmer of Hope's captain had yet to take part. However, this light of selection did not target any of the Bright Glimmer of Hope squad, but 2 other competitors, one being a powerhouse from the Night Temple, and the other one from the Spiritual Temple. Therefore, the last match would naturally be between Long Haochen and the last person from the Mage Temple. Seeing that this match was not his own, Long Haochen waved his hand at Han Yu. Han Yu had long since received Long Haochen's instructions. Because he had been eliminated beforehand, he was not inside the competitor's booth, but in the more distant spectators' lounge. Having received Long Haochen's signal, Han Yu lightly nodded, expressing his understanding, before slowly shutting his eyes. No one noticed that among Bright Glimmer of Hope's ranks, Kier, Wang Yuanyuan, and Lin Xin had a golden dot of light on their backs. But by leaning against their seats, this light was thoroughly concealed. Only Bright Glimmer of Hope's people realized what was happening. These were the effects of Han Yu's spiritual stove of light's blessings. Along with his rise in cultivation, Han Yu's spiritual stove of light's blessings had evolved 2 times in total. The current light's blessings was no longer just recovery in a set area. More importantly, Han Yu's blessings could be transmitted to the others through the soul-sharing chains. In a certain range, through the chains he was able to assist his comrades from Bright Glimmer of Hope in recovering spiritual energy. And the fewer the targets, the faster the recovery assistance. The reason why Long Haochen did not signal Han Yu before was naturally because his spiritual stove could still only be used once a day, so it had to be done in the most crucial instant. Now that the 5th match had already started, Lin Xin, Wang Yuanyuan and Kier all had massive consumptions. And after that, he would have to take part in the 6th match as well, after which the 6th round would immediately start, without leaving them any time for recovery. If Long Haochen had just been picked by the light of selection to take part in the 5th match, maybe he could delay the use of the spiritual stove of light's blessings a bit as well to profit, but now was clearly the best timing in this situation. The reason why he shifted the activation in advance was that, as he had the Heart of Eternity, his spiritual energy's recovery was far above the others. No one could deny that Han Yu's boost was a form of cheating. But Long Haochen was tolerant to that, as everything he was doing was for the sake of allowing the Temple Alliance to develop still further. This state of dispersion of the Temple Alliance had already gone on for 6,000 years, and with each of the 6 great temples having its own authority was a deep-rooted system. They had very complex relationships between each other, and to put that to an end would be a really challenging thing. The only way would be to make them all compromise, but even should it succeed, the qualitative changes would actually most likely not be too huge either. So, Long Haochen had already come to the conclusion that what he had to do was to make Bright Glimmer of Hope really stand above the crowd in this temple's great gathering. Although it had weak foundations, and could only rely on the few of them, they also had their unique advantages. Even after omitting the positions each of them held in their own temple, they had naturally good dispositions. After having experienced so many things, and coming to that point today, Long Haochen believed this to be his unshirkable responsibility. For the sake of his plan, a brand new alliance ought to be founded, where he, as the Scion of Light, had to become one of the leading figures. Through Bright Glimmer of Hope's drive and strength, they would be the greatest contributors in the alliance's reorganization. In order to achieve this plan, a little fraud was no issue as the final result was the most important thing. Long Haochen believed that their individual performance had already convinced the overwhelming majority of the alliance's higher-ups. The further they could go in the temple's great gathering, and the higher their result, the more weight they would gain in the meetings after it ended, and the more backing they would receive. The match was continuing fiercely, the Spiritual Temple and Night Temple both having only one last person left. This match would determine whether or not they would enter the top 6, which is why the contest was especially fierce. The clashes between these 2 powerhouses frequently caused cracks to appear on the defensive barrier, which was reinforced continuously by the numerous referees. No one knew that those 3 from Bright Glimmer of Hope were all recovering their spiritual energy at an astonishing speed. The spiritual stove of light blessings continuous recovery was of extremely great use. It was not even only about accelerating their recovery, as Hanyu could even transfer his own spiritual energy through it, transferring an elemental power of extreme purity. This was a matter he had comprehended thanks to absorbing the pure spiritual energy in the Tower of Eternity. With the rise of his cultivation, Hanyu was growing more and more inclined to the supportive type. Even a pure supporter at the 9th step was a considerably powerful existence. And Hanyu had his own goal, which was to become a divine knight. The match went for a whole quarter of an hour. Before the match was finally ended, both sides suffered through a very close match, but in the end that domain-wielding knight was a step ahead and finally managed to achieve victory. But it was a very close victory, with a massive consumption of his spiritual energy, and even his domain had reached its limits. It would visibly take quite a moment for him to recover entirely. Finally, Long Haochen went on stage without need for the light of selection, entering the field alongside that mage. With their results, Bright Glimmer of Hope's performance in the individual stage already reached an unswayable stage. That final night, being really close to his limits, had nearly fainted directly after exiting the stage. With Bright Glimmer of Hope having 3 qualified members, they would very possibly draw him, which would pretty much guarantee them 1 seat on the top 3. Although Li Jingji was giving his all in recovering his spiritual energy, his previous consumption was considerable. Even if he did make it to the top 3, Bright Glimmer of Hope would very possibly take the final seat, although this would mainly depend on this one match. All knew that Long Haochen was their captain as well as strongest member. Putting aside his higher chances of victory, should he be eliminated in this match, this mage would definitely not have it easy either. In case Bright Glimmer of Hope should take 2 of the top 3 seats, their 2 members could reject the final 3-person round-robin tournament, so that they could be considered the final champions of the individual competition. Therefore at this point, Bright Glimmer of Hope was in a pretty safe position already. Long Haochen calmly confronted the opposite mage, clad in a yellow gown. That was not a mage's robe, but it clearly illustrated his elemental attribute, as that was an earth mage. The 2 of them exchanged determined glances, before the final match between the top 12 started. Long Haochen did not immediately utilize the light god domain this time. Striding forward, the 6 wings on his back flashed and flapped as his body shot forward like a streak of light. Lightning flash. A golden hexagram slowly extended from where he had been. The divine unicorn slowly appeared behind Long Haochen, shaking its wings to elevate itself high in the air. In the course of launching lightning flash, Long Haochen had already materialized a pair of heavy swords through spiritual highland, launching a cross strike at the opponent. The earth mage was not panicked in the slightest, his hands forming a gesture in front of his chest. Immediately, Long Haochen felt his body sink down, his speed dropping tremendously. That was gravity technique. In the meantime, the earth mage aimed a distant palm strike to welcome the distant Haochen, just like a warrior. A terrifying scene arose, a hill over 20 meters tall suddenly appearing in midair on its way to collide with Long Haochen. Crossed swords strike landed loudly on that hill, as Long Haochen's body tensed up. In all eyes, Long Haochen should have been able to dodge. Although it came suddenly, and was an instant cast, that hill was really towering and thick. A clash was no good solution. And, just getting out of the way seemed sufficient, as that large hill would not be of great use anyway. But Haochen didn't do so. His body flashed to strike against the hill. Immediately, it stopped in midair. The earth mage had a chill, knowing that the opponent had seen through his spell. He actually wanted Long Haochen to dodge, as this hill was just a support to launch a powerful gravity technique. But by directly striking the hill, he had visibly cut off that following move. The earth mage chanted rapidly, that hill having only stalled for 3 seconds, and a deafening sound of an explosion followed. Countless rocks splattered in all directions as a towering sword intent arose in midair. Relying on it, Long Haochen forcibly broke this hill and the next instant, charged straight toward the mage. His 6 wings provided him with a really enormous speed. Moreover, he had the aid of lightning flash, so the earth mage had no way to escape at all. In that case, he may as well not even try. A transparent barrier surrounded his body which, when struck by Long Haochen's pair of swords materialized from spiritual highland, produced series of sonorous crackling sounds. But that barrier was still unmoving and didn't have any visible trace of damage. What a great defense! If one paid attention, he would realize that the transparent barrier was not like an ordinary magic barrier. It seemed to have countless cuts on its surface which produced a bright brilliance under sunlight's illumination in the same way as a polished diamond. Starry Diamond Barrier, one of the most powerful defensive spells of Earth Element. Long Haochen was pushed back but not discouraged. The divine unicorn behind him had already caught up, and a divine light shot out from its horn, glinting on Long Haochen's body and lit up his body in multicolored light. A torrential sword intent once again burst out from Long Haochen, severe expression on his face. His heavy swords united above his head, going down in a flash. An earthly yellow halation came up this time from below the Earth Mage. This divine-grade Earth Mage really had great accomplishments in defense. That yellow halo actually enlarged the scope of Starry Diamond Barrier. Long Haochen was shooed away with his sword, and although a crack had appeared on the Starry Diamond Barrier, it was rapidly restored by the yellow halation within. What a great defense! Long Haochen was startled. In the defensive aspect, this Earth Knight was perhaps not inferior to that supreme shield of the Night Temple. The heart of eternity was pulsing violently. Hearing this Earth Mage still continuously chanting, Long Haochen remained calm, quietly releasing a golden halation. The Light God domain finally appeared, and not only that, but right after appearing it started to display the phenomenon associated with the release of the domain technique Divine Light Walls. The look on the Earth Mage's face changed, but his incantation remained unchanging, the yellow halation under his feet only growing even more intense. His domain was named Solidification. A simple-sounding name, but it actually reinforced any of his earth spells with an ultra-great defense. When young, he was known with the title of Tortoiseshell, absolute number one in terms of defense out of the whole Mage Temple. Even Li Jingxi would need to expend a lot of magic power to defeat him, relying on the difference in cultivation to win the match. Li Jingxi had given him direct instructions on how to deal with the situation before going on stage. For this Earth Mage to defeat Long Haochen with his attacks would be really difficult, so Li Jingxi suggested he tire out Long Haochen, who would surely try to achieve a rapid victory and thus use a lot of his domain's power. Then he was to look for a chance in the midst of stalling. Even if he would end up defeated by Long Haochen, that way he will have certainly depleted a lot of his spiritual energy, thus raising Li Jingxi's chances in the rest of the competition. Although Li Jingxi knew that should Bright Glimmer of Hope acquire 2 spots on the top 3, there would most likely be no final champion to designate, he still strove for victory with his utmost. In his eyes, although Kier's domain was really bizarre, she was already too much depleted, thus only Long Haochen alone could really make up a threat to him. Long Haochen's Divine Light Walls having already been launched twice, its volume was clearly smaller than the first time, proof that his spiritual energy was not yet fully replenished. When the Divine Light Walls and Starry Diamond Barrier collided first, it came immediately to a clash between the strongest attack and greatest defense. An ear-piercing grinding sound came out immediately to everyone's ears. That was really an unpleasant sound. Countless sparks arose from the clash between the two great techniques in the midst of magic and shaking. Divine Light Walls slowly cut its way in, but it advanced very slowly. All could see that both sides had their spiritual energy depleted intensely. The Earth Mage's incantation became swifter and swifter. As one of the top powerhouses of the Mage Temple, he was unwilling to take a passive beating in front of such a youngster. That was someone whose position was quite higher than even Lin Chen in the Mage Temple. The intense yellow halo from the Starry Diamond Barrier gradually turned muddy, as terrible Earth Essence was in the midst of getting compressed and accumulated, about to possibly burst out at any time. But Long Haochen seemed to ignore that. With the boost of the Divine Unicorn, his Divine Light Walls only grew more and more powerful. The Diamond Starry Barrier already had a small hole in its midst, and the Divine Light Walls only kept pushing through. At this rate, it would take him at most perhaps 2 minutes to achieve victory against this Earth Mage. This video will end here.